what we did was we made 4 mobile chicken houses that we put in the public space where nothing was happening. And slowly this open space in the city became a place where people came together to take care of the chickens, to meet with each other. And these same trailers, we also used them to put gardens in, because people in the neighborhood, they wanted to garden, but it was not allowed by the municipality. So here you see the trailers in a public space, public green, and a lot of people wanted to participate in this gardening. So we went back to the municipality and said, look at the demand for gardening that there is in this neighborhood. We have to find a solution that more people can engage into this activity. And then together with a housing corporation, we managed to open up a garden in an inner courtyard, and we turned it into a vegetable garden for the whole neighborhood. Important next to this social sustainability, as we call it, is ecologic sustainability. And here you see it's a playful word, Cascoland. My collective Cascoland started producing gas. We were collecting old bread in the neighborhood. We built this machine, we called it the bread digester, and in this machine bacteria were producing biogas. And we did this just in a residential house. And in the other room you see me with a contraption that we made with a bicycle wheel to put pressure on the gas. And here every day women were making bread on the gas that we were making out of old bread. And we are collecting frying oil, discarded frying oil in the neighborhood, and we make products with it. For instance, soaps, and we try to sell these to organizations in the neighborhood that usually buy their soap commercially, but now they are buying them from the residents. And so we have this soap line, but we also very recently are making candles out of the old frying oil. So it's a circular idea. You take a waste product and you turn it into something positive in the neighborhood. One of the most recent projects that we do is the public orchard. This is a green space in the city, and we have a fruit garden there. And it's just in public space. It's open for everybody to access, to come there. Even the bees have found a way to get there. We are producing fruits and food, and people are coming to pick and eat from them. But we also cook with it and invite residents to become part of this activity. We go to the market in New West, and together with the guys, the market salesmen, we turn the waste food that they have left over into products. Like, for instance, this Indian plum chutney that we made with my friend Hari Krishnan, a guy from India who lives in the neighborhood. And here you see Cécile, a French colleague of me that works in my collective, and she made apricot jams in the market. And as you see, the audience, they love doing it. So what you see in this quick presentation is that we try to combine socio-economic neighborhood activity and social and ecologic sustainability to create communities in Amsterdam West. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to have been able to do this presentation, and I'm very curious to talk to you about the topics at stake today. Thank you. Спасибо.
Спасибо, Roel. Я вижу, что у вас грандиозное количество проектов представлено на сайте. Даже если учесть, что вы работаете с 2013 года, все равно у вас всего только 2 сооснователей проекта. Как вы добиваетесь такого количества проектов в таком множестве городов?
Actually, we started in 2004, so now we have been active for 16 years already. And me and Fiona de Bell, we started this collective, and we are able to do all these projects because for every project we make new teams of professionals, designers, artists, scientists, performers. All these different skills we think are important to make multidisciplinary teams, and these teams, they tackle these projects that we do. And so I have a number of projects that are running in the Netherlands. We also are engaged in a few long-term projects abroad, like in Mexico. At the moment, a lot of the international work is, of course, limited, but we're staying in touch with also the projects abroad. And so it's important, this organization. How do you get the right people together in your team to do this kind of work?
Спасибо. Судя по всему, вам очень хорошо удается. Я хочу передать слово Кристофу Шеферу, Park Fiction,
Yes.
и услышать о опыте объединения такого серьезного низового политического объединения в Гамбурге.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pity that I can't come. Hello to St. Petersburg from the area, the neighborhood of St. Pauli in Hamburg. And yeah, we are here in the... I would have loved to come because I have never been, in contrast to Roel, I have never been to Petersburg yet, and I have friends there and would love to come. So I will not do the same thing that Roel did. I will not show you many projects. I will only show you one so that you have a reason to have me once this plague is over and I can come to Petersburg in person to show you some more stuff. So I hope I can now share my screen there. And I try. Can you see it well? Yeah. Okay. So I do a quick tour through a project called Park Fiction, started in 1994. And it doesn't work. It does work. It's Hamburg is a city at a river and the biggest harbor in Germany, and the area I'm speaking about was a piece of land where the houses had been torn down in the 60s, and it had a splendid view on the harbor, and we in the neighborhood wanted to fight to keep this. And in the time before we started, there was a big squat movement in Hamburg happening. It was the Hafenstraße squat, which was a very confrontative but successful group of houses. And the people who lived in those houses managed to prevent the demolition of these houses, and these houses are now cooperative in Hamburg. But these were quite harsh fights, and we needed to find a new way. How can you fight in a different time when people actually do not have so much fun in being street fighters anymore and are tired, and it's also a very exclusive way of working. And the method that we developed, we call it a parallel planning process. And this is the key term I would like to introduce today, because I think it could be applied to many other types of problems and conflicts. So the idea was to work parallel, not to confront, and we mean with this, not to confront the state directly, not to squat in that sense, but to create a kind of parallel world of communication and working and developing ideas without confronting the state in the first place. So we started to claim the land with a small act. We put this sign up there in the style of Italian pizza place. And we started a production of desires, as we call it. So we asked people what they want to have in this plot of land, which the city wanted to sell and we wanted to transform into a park. Some, for instance, wanted a hedge cut in the shape of a poodle. And as you can see, we realized this. There's the poodle. another photo of this wonderful poodle. And of course, it's also a little comment to use this kind of royal way of working with our small ideas from the neighborhood. How did we operate? One important thing is to create situations which allow people to think out of the box. Another, I go through this very quickly as we have no time and I don't want to bore you, of course. Another strategy was to organize activities that anticipate what we want to have later in real. So for instance, instead of protesting, we would just make a big picnic in the area. For instance, this grill competition, this was the battle of the grill systems back in, I don't know, sometime in the 90s. And we were grilling between the parked cars where we wanted to have a park in the future. We built these improvised platforms for sunbathing and so on. The key idea is to bring the local knowledge into such a process, like the knowledge of a baker, and by all these activities, we managed to connect the political field, the social, and the art field. In the background, you already see the realized park. We developed new tools that make it more easy to plan. For instance, this action kit, unfoldable kit where you have plasticine inside, a tape recorder, Polaroid camera. This was pre-digital era. And you could place things in there and test how they work in front of the panorama of the Elbe. We organized the planning process as a game. And actually, we gave out these game boards to show everybody how where were the access points to this process. I skip this. And yeah, as I said, we call this the collective production of desires. And I will only show you one example of how we worked. Besides the poodle, one idea was brought in by a guy called Muamma, a kid who drew this island with a palm tree. And his friend Ferzi drew another island. Someone else drew another island. And Erkan also drew an island. And out of this, other people developed more ideas of palm trees and islands. For instance, our architect developed this idea of a rollable island with a palm tree. Someone started to take pictures of palm trees in the neighborhood or in the holidays. And this palm tree here, for instance, was on a carousel, on a merry-go-round on the local fun fair and on a machine called Viva Mexico. And in the next picture, you see the palm tree that we actually built in the park, which this is how it looks today. And it's a one-to-one copy, basically, of this palm tree. And then this became a symbol and people appropriated it out of our control. All these ideas were brought together in a community conference and decided about, and finally the city agreed to build all this. And yeah, and so this, from working parallel, it became steering a process. So that's, I think, and as you can see, this is a very prestigious, lovely piece of land, which would have been a very, very nice and expensive place to sell. And we managed to have this, one of the best music clubs in Hamburg is in our territory. So by working together with the music scene and with this project, we managed to keep it. It is here, the Golden Poodle Club. Yeah, so we have this small but very, very nice park today, which defines itself again and again. I will not go through this only quickly. It's used a lot, as you can see here. And the last two pictures are here now because we now, after 20 years, this summer, we started that we want to extend this process to this piece of land, which is in front of the park. It's this concrete ground. And we are now a group or a team of 15 people who are working on this in the neighborhood. And this summer, actually in the pandemic, we started a new phase of production of desires for this land at the harbor. Yeah, so working parallel can bring you into a position of of changing, actually, from imagination to reality. It can work. And we did not invent this idea of parallelity. Someone else invented it, but I will can talk about this in the discussion maybe. Thank you for your Aufmerksamkeit, for your attention.
Спасибо, Кристоф. Ну, правильно ли я понимаю, что ваш проект, он был в общей рамке движения «Право на город» в Гамбурге, и так или иначе вы взаимодействовали с протестными движениями? Или вы работали абсолютно в отрыве от них?
Well, to be precise, at the beginning, it was a process that we organized as a art project, so to say. And because it was art, you don't have to ask anybody to do it. Art is free, at least in Germany and in most Central European countries. It would be censorship to stop an art project. So we just basically started by fantasizing together, but doing this in a very, very open and widespread way. And I think that politicians didn't take us serious because most of the time politicians underestimate art and the power of art, and that can be a great advantage. If your enemy thinks you're weak or a clown, then maybe you can reach much more. And on the other hand, with our way of working, after a while, we had a fantastic legitimization because we worked with a local church, with a local school, with designers, with people who would probably in an area like this go against each other, more left-leaning people, people who have small businesses. Things started to work together, and because we had one goal, a common goal, we could build a new kind of coalition. And in the end, this was quite a political power. And in the end, it was a official planning process. So in the end, we had control of a very normal city planning process.
Спасибо, Кристоф. Я бы хотела передать слово Аннбритт Йогерсен, Дания, основательница проекта Skraldecaféen.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me? Yeah. I don't. I haven't brought any pictures because I don't normally do slides when I do this. I always start off with a music video that we made, but it would take too long to show it. So I hope you can find it on YouTube afterwards. Yeah. I want to tell you a bit about how we started this project, because we didn't start actually with doing the dumpster diving cafe. We started in a different place. I am what you would call a professional dumpster diver. And what we did was, back in 2014, we did a network of dumpster divers who went out and collected food and then shared it with families who didn't have a lot of money. Unfortunately, the authorities found out that we were doing this and told us to stop it. What they said was, you can't just share food with people, you need a license for that. But if you take the food to their kitchen and cook it together with them, then you're allowed to do it. So we started looking at the law and found out it didn't have to be their kitchen. It could be our kitchen as well. And that was kind of the solution to the problem. We built a kitchen because then we had this like a big mobile kitchen that we could bring out and put up in parks. And then we could invite people in to cook together with us. And we could be like, I think the first time we put it up, we were like 120 people cooking together for a whole day. And the authorities called us and said, you can't do this. You're not allowed to do this. And we said, well, you said yourself, if we cook it together with people, then we can do it. And she went really, really quiet. And then she said, well, then I can't stop you. And we said, no, you can't. And that's basically what we've been doing since 2015. And now we have actually got a license saying that what we're doing is legal. In 2017, we built another project into the project. And the authorities don't like this project either. But since there is no law saying we can't do this either, then they had to accept that we did it. We built a community fridge next to the place where we are, which is basically a fridge that is on the municipality ground, and it's open 24/7, and no one controls who puts something in it, and no one controls who takes something from it. So it's a way of sharing food with people without actually giving it directly to them, because, as I said, you can't give food to people. So we don't give food to people. We just put it there and then leave it, and people can take it. What we have found out throughout this project is that it attracts a lot of people from different parts of the society, because everyone has some sort of relation to food. And when you come to our place, it could be a homeless person serving you coffee instead of you bringing coffee to a homeless person. That wouldn't be unusual to see where we are, because there are a lot of drug users and a lot of homeless people in the area where we are located. And they not only benefit from what we do in our project with the food, but they also come for the entire society around the project. Instead of we are only a few meters from the needle park where the drug users are sitting with their drugs, and to get a break from that, they come to us and sit and have a cup of coffee, and they have started interacting with us and saying, is there something we can do to help? Is there something you need help for? And we have found out that they're actually protecting us. You can go anywhere else in this area, and if you don't lock everything down, it's gonna get stolen. But if you are at our exact location, nothing gets stolen. And if it does get stolen within an hour, it's gonna be back where you left it. Because everyone in this area actually protects us, even though it's a really hard area with a lot of homeless people and a lot of drug users. But there are this like unwritten rules that this is like the only place you don't steal from. It's probably also the only place where you can see the mayor sitting next to a homeless person, or children coming together with drug users, and everyone being equal without really looking at your social status. Because this is a place where everyone fits in, no matter who they are. And I think that is also the reason why we are we're so the project is so likable, because we have space for people that does not fit into anywhere else in the society. We have people with diagnosis. We have both former and current drug users. We have former homeless. We have current homeless. We have people who are retired, people who are unemployed, people who are students. It's like everyone has a part in this project, and everyone can take ownership of this project. It's not a project that belongs to anyone, and that also means the project has changed a lot throughout the years, because the volunteers that were part of the project in the beginning are not necessarily the same who are there now, and when the volunteers change, the project changes as well. Even though a lot of people really like what we do, and we have a lot of support from the municipality and the area around us, the difficulty about this project is that there's no one really wanting to invest money in it. So even though we do a lot of good things, like we have this saying that we're using food waste from the supermarkets to fight not only hunger, but also loneliness, psychic vulnerability, homelessness, and poverty. The problem is that it's not a project that anyone wants to invest anything in. So unless we find a solution to the economical problems we have gotten throughout the COVID-19, we're going to be closing down in 1.5 months. So. Normally when I do this kind of talk, it's more like interacting with my audience. So it's easier for me to tell you what you want to know or to answer your questions according to what you want to know than for me to trying to guess what you want to know. So.
Я задам один уточняющий вопрос, и на дискуссии мы поговорим в режиме интерактива. Мне интересно, забираете ли вы еду из супермаркетов, или ваше место сейчас существует за счет того, что люди сами приезжают и привозят еду? Откуда источники еды? Какие источники еды у вас сейчас?
That is one of the things that have changed over the years. In the beginning, it all came from dumpster diving, because we had to start somewhere. We had to start without being a known project and without anyone knowing who we was and what we were doing. So we were dumpster diving just like everyone else who did dumpster diving. But then as the project grew, we started being contacted by cafeterias, restaurants, private people, and also the supermarkets, and they wanted to make deals with us to donate the food to us so that we didn't have to go to dumpsters. So we actually don't do any dumpster diving anymore. We have deals with the supermarkets to go and pick it up before it go to the dumpsters.
Спасибо, Аннбритт. Мы обязательно еще обсудим проекты. Я сейчас хочу передать слово нашему последнему спикеру, Осин Алиуан-Шо. Извините, если некорректно произношу. Основатель и член ассоциации Brut de Frigo, Бордо, Франция.
Hello and good evening. Can you hear me well? Okay, thanks.
Да, все хорошо, слышно.
Okay, so well, I'll try and be as short as possible, like my colleagues, and make a short presentation of what Bruit du Frigo tries to do and has been doing over the past few years, and then I'm open to discussion with everybody. So I'll just start by sharing the screen. Try to do this as well as possible. Just move a few things. Okay, has everybody got this my screen? Good. I'll just move something. Okay. So Bruit du Frigo is a French transdisciplinary collective that was created in 1997 that gathers a group of persons who are architects, urban designers, cultural engineers, And also, sorry, but my slideshow is going a bit too fast. I'm going to have to do something. Okay, sorry, it's a little technical problem here. Going too quick. I'm going to change my file because it's going too fast. Oh. I'm going to stop the sharing. I have no control. Oh God, what is this? Yeah, okay. I don't know why this was going so fast. So I'm working on something else. I'm going to probably do this manually, it'll probably be easier. So hopefully it won't go too fast anyway, otherwise I'll have to do it very fast myself. So I was saying we are a French collective with a mix of architects, urban designers, artists, and also cultural engineers, created in 1997, based in Bordeaux. And it's a multidisciplinary team that tries to create participatory projects which combine art, art and public intervention. We use a series of different tools. Sorry, I don't know what's happening here. This is going too fast. I'm having to stop again. Oh, this is not working. I'm stopping this. Sorry, just give me 1 minute. This has never happened before, so this is the pleasure of live interventions. Okay, this should be okay. And it will be okay this time. There we go. So I'm not going to do it again as I did. So just go down. Okay. So the main idea is that Rue du Frigo develops participatory projects in public space, and the means it very often uses is artistic installation and microarchitecture, and both these methods are used in the framework of collective action. Some of the main topics or fields of work of Rue du Frigo, I will only talk about two today. One of them is the rethinking of the role and the uses of public space. And one of the tools that is very often used is what we called utopian urbanism workshops. And these workshops that take many forms, shapes, have various aims, mainly exploring new possibilities of uses in public spaces, also stimulating creative appropriations of open spaces within neighborhoods and cities. And there is also an attempt to resist privatization and also a strong trend of standardization of public space here in France. There is also a second field of work, apart from working on new uses in public space, and it is trying to find means of making cities in a more cooperative and a more civic way, involving local inhabitants and local communities. The idea behind these different methods that we use is to empower local communities and local residents, give them a voice in the planning process or in the making of the city, and also finding new ways of cooperating or cooperation between various stakeholders, mainly local residents and local governments and authorities. The works of Rue du Frigo take lots of forms and shapes. One of them, or some of them, are workshops and exhibitions, within which this dimension of sharing and transmitting knowledge is a transverse approach. Something else is these temporary workshops, and something that you find is kind of a common denominator in most of the interventions is that we tend to use what we sometimes call units of space and time, mainly through microarchitectures, which create a sense of place where we can work for short periods of time with people and gather around a subject and shared interests that we work on during these immersion periods that we tend to have in local communities. So this is another example of a mobile workshop. This is some big event that we had organized, and you see that we're still using this idea of micro architecture, participatory mapping, also within a workshop and an event, cultural event. There are also in the means that are used temporary and experimental installations, but the installations are never an end by themselves. They are just a means to create moments of sharing with the local community that we probably have been working with for several months beforehand. We always call this the visible part of the iceberg. It is the installation is the moment where things become visible, but there's lots of work that's done with the community beforehand. And as I was saying earlier on, these time and space units or capsules, this is another one that we called the ring, is an open stage. And as I was saying earlier on, the team also, members of the team also cultural engineers and artists. So any project in Rue du Frigo is not specifically an architectural or an urban design project. It is a mix of art, culture, and public action within a cultural and artistic programming. So this is just another side of the same idea. The idea with most of the projects is to create maybe an ephemeral installation that can last from a few days to a few months, with underlined by a cultural, artistic, and even, if applicable, a pedagogical program, which tends to gradually bring people to create a kind of sense of community and work together, in this case, towards the transformation of this plot of land in the following few months. This is the same area with another range of activities such as urban gardening. This is another example also where a cabin as a time and space capsule was created to work with the people. And there was always a very important dimension of leisure and having a good time with the people before starting sometimes working very seriously on certain topics and ideas. Some of the other activities are very ephemeral and are just put in place to as a prefiguration of new uses of public spaces and new forms of appropriation that later on may move into more official canals with the local authorities. This is another type of installation that was made for several weeks on the top of a social housing building in Bordeaux, a wellness center that was aimed at the local inhabitants, but also brought people from the wider city of Bordeaux to come into this rundown neighborhood. And the idea was to mix through the activities and through the cultural program to mix the populations from the city and its outskirts. And this same idea of prefiguration of future uses of public space, this is a project in Lyon that runs around along the same principle, with what we call spaces of laziness, places where people could just take a nap or a rest in the afternoon. This is in Perpignan. In Morocco also. To go quickly, this was one of the projects, one of our most recent projects before lockdown last year in the city of Casablanca in Morocco, and where we kind of created a fictional urban furniture factory in this rundown neighborhood and in this rundown plaza, and people came over and started ordering furniture, and that gave us the opportunity to start meeting people, start networking, and create a local dynamic. And then we worked with them for several weeks, prefiguring the use of this rundown open space in this popular neighborhood in Casablanca. And we had a great pleasure there was an interactivity and a kind of immediate form of appropriation by the locals that we had never encountered in 22 years of activity. And it was a very, very socially and humanly speaking, very strong experience. Another type of intervention is, in French we say chantier, and it doesn't translate very well in English. It means building sites, but I think it's more work camps, and I try to say that in a very, very positive way. We're not it's not forced labor. And so this is one of the other protocols or formats that we use for our interventions. And as I was saying earlier on, the teams in Rue du Frigo are multidisciplinary, but they have something in common, and that has built up over the years, is that whatever their background is, they have all evolved into builders, mainly using wood, and with the capacity of learning from the people, and in this case, maybe transmitting some of this knowledge to the people. I was saying earlier on that one of the ways of working also was collective actions. So this is mainly the leisure and cultural and live artistic programming that is always one of the frameworks of the interventions. It's never purely the works of designers. It's always, the design is always a means of a more complex and social project behind. So dance, theater. And this was a collective performance in a village where the circulation of cars was locked down for a day to prefigure future uses of all the open spaces in this village, where you can see everything is in dedicated to cars and public transport. And then, everything I was showing before is mainly ephemeral installations that act as stimulators of reflection, ideas, but there are also installations which are more permanent, and this is a gardener's house that was collectively and collaboratively and cooperatively created with the local community in La Rochelle, not far from Bordeaux. And this is one of the recent projects where over a very long period of time, that went from 2013 to today, it's still an ongoing project, the whole network of public spaces in the 1960s social housing neighborhood have been implemented and actually built over the past 5 years. I think I'm getting to the end. Hope I haven't been too long. And as usual, the project, the time of the project is a time of social interaction and working with the local communities. Thank you. And sorry for the technical problem. Oh, that was a nightmare.
Ничего ужасного не было, мне кажется, в таком формате все возможно. Мне бы хотелось перейти к дискуссии и задать, наверное, я бы хотела перейти к дискуссии и задать один такой большой вопрос от меня, а потом посмотрим, как мы будем двигаться дальше, потому что времени у нас около получаса на общение. Я бы хотела подчеркнуть, что все 4 презентации, да, так или иначе связаны с темой активации сообществ. И сегодня мы с вами говорим о том, как сообщества приобретают силу, приобретают власть, как они растут. Но здесь есть 2 момента. Мне кажется, что два проекта Park Fiction, да, и Skraldecaféen, они связаны с формированием одного большого устойчивого сообщества на протяжении достаточно длительного времени. И, соответственно, ваши сообщества могли проходить фазы, свойственные каждой социальной группе, и нарастание объема, и какие-то внутренние конфликты, и какие-то расколы. И хотелось бы узнать, что сейчас держит ваше сообщество на плаву, в чем соль солидаризации, где между собой. И с другой стороны, мы услышали в презентации Cascoland и Брюде Фриго много таких интересных проектов, ситуаций, которые формируют протосообщества, то есть еще не полноценные сообщества, но формируют группы людей, сводят их в едином пространстве и времени, и, возможно, когда-нибудь эти люди станут сообществом. Да, мы говорим не зря о некой эфемерности, о некой образности наших проектов, ваших проектов, но, тем не менее, эта образность тоже имеет значение. Вот в вашем случае, что такого коммунитарного есть в ваших проектах, что все же позволяет, дает толчок формированию этих сообществ? Были ли случаи того, что протосообщество переросло в настоящее сообщество, не временное, а постоянное? Я думаю, что можно брать слово, вот, как хочется, может быть, Осин начнет.
Okay. Yes, no problem. I completely subscribe to what you've just said, that when you go into an area, maybe the main stake is that there is maybe a lack of sense of community, or if there is, it's not a community per se, and that the whole idea behind the work is to try, create the community, but engage in the process that will bring things together and probably start a nucleus of what will create one or several senses of community in the place. So it is not unusual, it is even mostly the case in general. When we move into a neighborhood, it's because there is, when we work in, say, the neighborhood of social housing, on open space and on the evolution of open space, very often we go there, and one of the things that is told to us before we even start working, there is a problem of interaction between local communities, a multiplicity of small communities of different backgrounds, and local authorities. And the idea behind this is to try and bridge between both. And one of the aims of all these interventions, may they be artistic, cultural, pedagogical, or otherwise, is trying to build commons. And that very often brings us to do what we call the invisible work, which is several months of networking, identifying local structures. It can be people of different ages, different backgrounds, children, fictions, stories, things that kind of anchor what we're going to do in the future in this neighborhood. And it brings, it's not a question of quantity, but probably of quality and intensity. It brings a certain amount of people to begin to recognize each other, and then we start trying to link between, it can be schools, training centers, associations related to gender or anything else, and we start trying to create networks and coordination between these different groups. And that's when our project starts to build. We have no preconceived idea when we go somewhere, we're going to do this, and we're going to use this method we already have. We have a whole set of methods there that we have developed over the years, and I see lots of things that look like what I've seen with my colleagues. But when we go somewhere, it's a new storyline that builds with who you meet. And I think what's very, very important is a very immersive dimension of the work. You need to live for a certain period of time, maybe not sleep there every day, but you need to move in nearly with the community to start to build a new story with them. And then it takes the direction and dimension of the context and the means you also have. We do lots of public funded projects in France because there is local authorities now fund these projects. So that's, I'll make it short, but that creating this sense of community probably is at the end of the process, and it's not a guarantee. But the project is successful, even if it's ephemeral, if at the end it's taken over by the local community in whatever means they find suitable.
Спасибо. Роэль, вы хотите добавить с вашей стороны?
Yes. I recognize a lot in what you say, Osine, about the invisible work and the underlying groundwork. I was trained as a designer. Many of my colleagues are trained as architects or designers, and we were trained to design solutions. But I think that what we all share today, the presentations, is that we no longer design solutions, but we design a space for encounter and exchange. So what we actually do is we facilitate civic cross-pollination. And for that, of course, the design mindset is important because as you also said, Osine, we have different methods that we have learned by trial and error that work, and how you can engage people in this collective moment that you are creating. So in this way we actually are designing or creating a public space, and then what happens within this facilitated public space, this is where the community heart is pounding and where the solutions have to start coming from, and not necessarily from the designers. So that is a thing that I wanted to add. I've been following Bruit de Frigo for quite some time, and I see we share a lot of elements, but we're also totally different, and I think that is great to see that all over Europe this kind of movement is happening. As I said before, I was in St. Petersburg myself a few times. I know that there is such a climate there as well that can produce this kind of attitudes. So that is why it's great that we can share our thoughts here today. Thank you.
Great.
Спасибо. Мы тут тоже стараемся генерировать и эфемерные, и постоянные общественные пространства. Я бы хотела спросить, Аннбритт, как у вас все происходит с формированием сообщества? Оно, я так понимаю, более такое стабильное, постоянное. Какие фазы вы прошли? Что сейчас?
Well, we started as a mobile kitchen, and now we have a permanent space. So we have gone through a lot of phases to actually get to where we are now. But we don't use a lot of methods, and we don't overthink things. One of our volunteers came with our main solution in the very beginning. He was very fond of coffee. And then he got a shop to donate some really exquisite coffee beans. And then he would be standing in our mobile kitchen with his little coffee grinder. And people would come and ask, can we buy a cup of coffee? And he would say, no, but you can have a cup of coffee. And already there, he started a conversation. They started asking questions. Why is this free? Because it's a cup of coffee you would normally pay a lot for in a fancy cafe. And here you could get it for free in a park. So people would start asking questions to find out what the project was. And when they found out what the project was, they would come back again the next time we put it up. So a lot of people have come by just because we had coffee, and then they stayed because we were actually really nice people. Another thing about a project is that we can't overthink things, because this is a project run by people with difficulties to make space for people with difficulties. Like I'm the founder of this project. I have Asperger's syndrome and I have narcolepsy, and I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. So it's hard for me to fit into a normal workplace. I have my difficulties that I have to work around being in the society. We have another person with Asperger's who is a part of the board in our project. We have a person who is diagnosed with ADHD, and he's been using drugs for 17 years, but is clean now. But these are actually the people who run the project, who is like the core of the project. So we have to have space for everyone's difficulties and to understand each other, so that every time something comes up, we sit around and we talk about it. Like the other guy who has Asperger's, he has some things he does to be able to fit into a group of people, and not everyone else understands this part about having Asperger's. So what I did was I said to him, you need to explain to the others what your difficulties are, so that they can understand what it is like to be you. And so he stood up, something that he had never really done before, in front of people that he didn't really know very well. And he said to them, well, this is me, this is who I am, this is the things I need to do to be able to be social together with you. And all of a sudden there was an understanding of, well, this is why he is the way he is. And that's the way we get around the difficulties that everyone has. We try to understand what it is like to be this person or that person. But we don't overthink things, we just talk about it.
Спасибо. И, Кристоф, вы, наверное, тоже хотели бы добавить о том, что происходило в вашем сообществе, как оно росло.
I don't know. I have the feeling there's a misunderstanding. This project was not about building a community, but about how to work together and transform the city. And part of it was to maybe, through a project like that, reconfigure, and that's a thing that connects all of the projects that were mentioned or shown today. How do we reconfigure public? How can we come together in a way now that we are not the same anymore? Or to put it in a totally different way, I think that all of our projects start with the criticism of modernism, its separations, and want to find new ways of putting things together, and of regaining the power to appropriate the world, of regaining the power to grow your own food, and or to use food in a different way, of getting away from a society that produces a lot of stuff and throws it all away. And I think, for instance, the last project that Ossin was showing, which was kind of add-on but correction or criticism of modernist 60s housing block. And there were several projects that were like a criticism of this urbanism that separates people, that separates functions. I think this is the starting point of many of all of these projects. And it's a bit like the critical point that starts these projects. And Park Fiction, to come back to your question, was not about bringing people together for the whole every day. We are no social workers at all. We are actually in the first place, maybe civil people, but in my case, an artist by education who intervenes into structures that were not made for artists, which is urban planning, for instance. Yeah, so together, so this was not about maintaining, it would be also a bit of an omnipotence fantasy, I think, to think that artists can maintain communities all the time. I think it's important to see that, for instance, that's why I mentioned this, our work wouldn't have been thinkable without the squatters before, and work by other people who work in Hamburg now and change the city in the wouldn't be able to work without examples like ours. So there's also, next to all these precise projects, there's a flow of knowledge that goes and spreads and has an effect. That's my 5 cents.
Спасибо. Уникально то, что все вы говорите по-своему о разных практиках создания новых конфигураций общественных пространств в городе, по сути, о реконструировании городской среды и о таком тактическом, ситуационистском даже изменении городской среды. То есть, мне кажется, мы нашу дискуссию могли бы назвать даже не дискуссией о сообществах, а дискуссией о том, как проекты, за которыми стоят различные сообщества, могут по-другому предлагать другие варианты развития городской среды, да, другие сценарии. Также удивительно, что все вы говорите так или иначе об образности, об эфемерности, об временности иногда некоторых проектов. И вот этот фикшн даже в названии парк-фикшн или эфемерность в названии инсталляции Осина, да, это действительно очень показательные такие моменты. Я бы хотела задать последний вопрос со своей стороны. Вот мы понимаем, что подобные практики, подобные пространственные практики, они действительно критические, они противостоят официальному дискурсу, они противостоят официальному порядку, они подрывают дисциплинарное пространство города и являются альтернативной силой или силой параллельного планирования, как говорил Кристоф. Но, тем не менее, каждый из вас так или иначе упомянул, что вы взаимодействовали с муниципалитетами, с муниципальной администрацией, какими-то даже местными бизнесами. Вот как это все же работает? Почему здесь не происходит войны и конфликта? И все же зачем это взаимодействие нужно, если мы с вами создаем альтернативную реальность? Да, я могу передать слово Кристофу, потому что вы на экране.
Yeah, wonderful question. Thank you. Well, I think it's, of course, good if there are, the first thing that we had to start with were local partners. And these were, people in the neighborhood to do the real thing on the ground, so to say. That was for us more real and more important, and then reaching out to the institution, to the government. In the end, of course, you cannot build a park, a sports hall, and so on without cooperating with the local administration. But the more important part is how to find the players in the neighborhood. And I think all of us have these kinds of projects that work in this type of web or fabric. And I think we all probably, only the French maybe, come from a country where there was a proper revolution, like in your country. So we cannot, maybe our imagination is too small to imagine, you know, this we will totally new. But I'm a bit believing into the Dutch philosopher Spinoza, who kind of was the first philosopher who thought about that we are always involved, and that we are never outside, but always involved in power relations, always in, and of course an autonomy is something operative in this, but not totally separate from it. Yeah.
Спасибо. Роэль, добавите что-нибудь?
Yes.
Я вас вызываю вот так, но как есть.
What I recognized in what Christoph was saying is that when I was a student in the 1980s, I moved to Amsterdam. At that time, all areas in Amsterdam were squatted. And this means that empty buildings were taken over for residential reasons, but also to create cultural spaces, to create studios, to create free spaces. By now, 30 years later, squatting is illegal, it's criminalized, but the networks are still there. You know, we had to always negotiate with the government and with the big corporations to realize our society that we were creating as independent squatters. And that knowledge and that skill and that sense of independence is still there, and this is what we use in our work as well. So a lot of the power that we have as communities, we take them from the crisis situations. You know, when there is an economic crisis, the government retracts, people's initiative gets space to develop itself. And so in this crisis, I have learned a lot of community power is being generated, which we need in the in-between phases when there is no crisis, when economy is booming, when gentrification takes over. This is when the power that we have created in crisis situations can be used to build these kind of networks and to try to sustain ourselves as citizens in the city and negotiate our position in these cities. So a lot comes from this sense of self-reliance. Thank you.
Спасибо. Аннбритт, Осин, хотели бы что-нибудь добавить на этот счет?
Yes, there's maybe something, I don't know if it's a French specificity or kind of French paradox. France is a country of, as you say, written law, especially city planning and urban design. Things are very written down in law. And 20 years ago, or over 20 years ago, when we started working in these more cooperative and participatory approaches, it was something that was on the side and that was parallel, as we were saying earlier on. But then these things kind of got written into the law in France, and now public participation, whatever shape that takes, and I mean, it doesn't always mean the same thing, has become something very often mandatory in planning processes, and with different results. And so the paradox is that very often we are in participatory and cooperative approaches, but we access this work through public tenders, and these tenders are produced by local authorities. So if we talk about having clients or someone who is paying at the end of the day, it is the local authority. So you end up being called on by local authorities, but you're producing something with local communities, which is very often going against the initial vision of the local authority. And because very often the software that they still use, even if they're very broad-minded and inclusive, at least when they speak, is very often a top-down approach of things. And very often they are not prepared for the bottom-up process and all the information and the desires that come with that. And it becomes very clear at that point that bottom-up process is what we work with and work on and are engaged with. But if you don't work how both meet top-down process and bottom-up processes, then you can have very interesting initiatives that don't last for very long. And there can be a split between authorities and what you've been doing on the ground. So it's really creating this bridge between both. And we have this paradox here. It's happened more often than less, which is we end up at some point appearing to the local authority for some period of time like we are the voice of the community and that we are working against the local authority, which is not the case. And there is really a very difficult period, but then it's pedagogical, and that's building a kind of shared culture where at some point things begin to kind of fit in, and there starts to be this kind of exchange. We try to find the most satisfactory solution at the end that kind of meets a bit of both ends, but it's very seldom one process top down or bottom up. If only one wins, then it's maybe not a very lasting victory at the end of the day. I don't know if what I said was clear because it's very French, but it's a paradox that we have here.
Мне кажется, в России еще больше парадоксов. Так что мы поняли. Мне бы хотелось, на самом деле, уже передать слово залу. Если Аннбритт не против, ну, вы можете высказаться сейчас, вот, когда мы возьмем вопросы из зала. Если вопросы, да, пожалуйста, вот, вам сейчас подойдет.
Можно говорить?
Да, можно говорить. Хорошо.
Так лучше? Так. Так. Слышно меня? Хорошо. Хочу большое спасибо сказать всем спикерам. Классные проекты, все эти пространства, кухни, воркшопинги. Но хотел уточнить, в текущей реальности, вот, когда у нас царствует эпидемия, пандемия, локдаун, как ваши все сообщества сейчас функционируют?
Да, надеюсь, вы услышали вопрос.
Maybe I can say something?
Да. Да, Роель, да.
Because we primarily, as I said before, design or facilitate exchange and encounter, the physical meeting of people is always a very important part of our work. And of course, because of the pandemic, a lot of the intensive physical meeting was not possible anymore. But at the same time, we also found that the communities, the members of the communities have this realization that they really strongly need each other, especially in this kind of a crisis situation like the pandemic. So a lot of the meeting or the encounter changed, but the urgency of meeting and coming together and exchanging and the physical meeting, the urgency of it became even more clear how important it is to us human beings to be able to meet each other. So I think our work became even more important in this pandemic times. And we see that we had to shift and adjust some of our behavior, but I think we also realize how much we need each other as human beings.
I totally agree with what you just said. Most of the work of Rue du Frigo at this stage is networking and preparing for when there is no lockdown or when the lockdown is eased. But I also work as a teacher at university, and we've had to adapt our ways of teaching, which tend to mime and imitate what we normally do in a classroom or in a studio. And it's very unsatisfactory because we don't have this interaction. That makes it more active. And I agree with what you say. It really makes you feel that as a human society, we need to work and interact and do things hands-on. And this type of situation, unless we have a biological evolution at some point, is unnatural. And we can imagine certain things, but I personally believe that we have to resume at some point our former practices. They may evolve to a certain degree, but we do need to be in field with people doing things. We can't do it at a distance. It just doesn't work out that way.
Can I say something as well and add something more to it? Because we're kind of an event project as well. So we have had more difficulties throughout this COVID-19, especially because Denmark has been in a lot of lockdowns, and we can't gather people, and we haven't been making any of the events this year. And that was how we've been making our money the other years. That was through facilitating events and doing workshops and talking to people. But we found out that the lockdowns created a different need where we could focus on our secondary projects with the community fridges, because with the lockdowns, the access to the soup kitchens was limited as well. So a lot of the homeless people needed another solution if they missed the time frame where they could get food from the soup kitchens. So we started making sandwiches and small plates with pasta and lasagna and things like that to put in the community fridge, so that there was a solution for the homeless people in the area when they didn't make it to the soup kitchen. And if we survive long enough, we have started creating a third project that is going to adapt into the difficulties around the COVID-19, and at the same time be a solution to the people in the area to actually make money as well.
Спасибо. Сейчас еще один вопрос из зала возьмем, потом еще один вопрос из чата. Есть ли вопросы? Да, пожалуйста.
Может, я скажу, Александра? А вот, уважаемые спикеры из Вот спикер из Амстердама говорила, что она искала инвестора на свой проект. Коллега из Бордо говорил, что спонсор – это государство, муниципалитет, заказчик. А есть ли примеры, когда само сообщество находило деньги внутри себя на свои инициативы? Вот это интересно.
Yes, definitely. We have this phenomena we call crowdfunding. We did a crowdfunding in a neighborhood in Amsterdam that was considered a bad neighborhood with low income housing, but the people wanted a public structure in the neighborhood. And the neighborhood managed to raise 20,000 euros within 4 weeks to start realizing this structure. So this community that was considered poor or of low income had the potential to raise 20,000 euros from themselves within 4 weeks. So I would say that that could be an example of such a thing.
I can add something to that as well, because we did actually start with having nothing at all. When we started the project, I was unemployed and we had no resources for anything. We built everything with reused materials because we had to start where we could do it without having to ask anyone for money, because we came with an idea that no one had ever heard of before and no one really understood what it was we wanted to do. So we had to take a chance and had to show people what it was we wanted to do. So we had to start with building from what we had, which was just the materials. But the project became so popular and started growing so much that we came to a point where we couldn't run it without having people invest in it. But we did start the whole project without having any money.
Спасибо. У нас есть вопрос из чата, очень интересный, и он, скажем, обусловлен нашим горьким опытом российским, опытом паблик-арт инсталляций, к примеру, или каких-то временных инсталляций в городском пространстве. Вопрос заключается в следующем. Были ли у вас примеры ситуации вандализма в адрес ваших проектов, в адрес инсталляций, в адрес мобильных точек, раздачи еды, да, какого-то непонимания насилия физического над объектами, может быть, не только над объектами? Как вы с этим справлялись? Можно сказать, кто хотел бы сказать, помашите рукой.
I can do that.
Okay.
Because we are located in an area with a lot of drug users and a lot of homeless people and a lot of people with all sorts of difficulties and temperaments, and of course there are things being destroyed. But as I said in the beginning, people really try to take care of us. We are like a free space, so the destruction of our property is very, very limited compared to what everyone else in the area experiences. But we have had some shelves being stolen from our fridges and some electricity cords being cut because people have been angry at something. Wood being stolen to be burnt near the homeless shelter and things like that. But we have based it all on things that can just be replaced, which makes it all a lot easier to deal with.
Maybe I can say something to this question. In the beginning of my presentation, I showed you some glass houses that we have put in the public spaces in Amsterdam. Now, when we built our first glass house in public space, everybody was telling us that we were crazy because for sure this was asking and attracting and even inviting vandalism. But I think that we were very certain that we could manage to do it because as we say, the programming of the glass house, so what is happening in the glass house and around the glass house is run by the community. So, of course, every now and then a window gets broken by accident, or maybe some young guys, they throw a stone. But really, we had very little because the people are protecting the spaces because they are community spaces. So it's the way that you program those spaces and the way that people feel ownership over them that prevents this kind of vandalism that you would expect.
I feel like adding on something that maybe is slightly provocative and it's on purpose, that probably the most important vandalism that we encountered over the past 20 years did not come from the people, it came from the local authorities. In some cases, too, I can say because it's I'm speaking from far. One case was in Bordeaux, and it resembles. It's also a story of a neighborhood park that was created on the lands that were intended for building some kind of development for, you know, high standard apartments and flats, and a community project has arisen from that and is still ongoing. But over the past 3 or 4 years, the local authorities have moved in temporary classrooms for a school that's been refurbished behind, and they've just eaten up nearly 30% of the space without asking any permission. And that is of a certain violence, and behind you don't know if that's the beginning of the end of something. And in Morocco, I was talking about Casablanca last year when we made this intervention in this neighborhood, and you can imagine that in certain political systems, this kind of approach is very unusual. Building all this furniture with the neighborhood over a period of 2 weeks, we didn't know what would happen once we left. This plaza I showed was arranged with the people and they used it every day. And we discovered that 3 weeks after we left, the local authorities came in with 3 big lorries and started pulling the furniture off the public space. And something very unusual happened that was sad and at the same time was quite good. The local inhabitants, and mainly the young chaps, the young guys, came down and stopped them from moving the furniture, saying, "This is ours. This belongs to us. You don't touch this." And that was the first time they had that reaction in that neighborhood that they became a bit scared of. And they had to go into a negotiation with groups of older people, young people, and they negotiated, moving every piece of furniture to specific locations indicated by the local population, the local mosque, a local garden or something. And when we came back last year, 12 months later, the furniture was still there in a certain state, but it was still there. And we were pleased to say to ourselves that somewhere there was a form of empowerment of the people. And as you said, it was theirs. They helped produce it and they used it and they considered, they looked after it because it belonged to them and they were using it. And what happened 1 year later, the local authorities, it's not good, but they refurbished this whole plaza with a very standardized approach of design. But they would have never, ever refurbished that space if there had not been that reaction. So somewhere this whole process brought in a new project that the people kind of like. We don't find it very creative, but that's our taste. But they're happy. I mean, it's clean, there's standardized furniture, they have shadow and things like that. And so out of this process of self-preservation and preserving what belonged to the community, there was a kind of forced dialogue with the local authorities, and they had leverage and they obtained something that we had not expected. We don't consider we just started something that lived its own life. But it was, at the same time, it was interesting to see that. So, and as you said earlier on, Roel, sometimes people can break a piece of glass, or you have a drug dealer that installs his little hiding place for the drugs inside one of your pieces of furniture. What we noticed is when the local authorities intervene all the time and repair things immediately, that things are looked after and looked after with the people, then they last. But I think if it's not something that you just drop down from the parachute, even if it's fantastic design, if it comes out of a catalogue or something and it's not locally adapted, it won't last. So, voilà. That's what I wanted to say.
Спасибо. Я думаю, что мы будем завершать нашу встречу, потому что время наше истекло, и потому что, да, хотя продолжать можно долго и долго. Я сразу скажу, что мы, к сожалению, не смогли ответить на все вопросы, которые идут к нам в чат. Я надеюсь, уважаемые слушатели в онлайне, что эта дискуссия будет повторяться и неоднократно и в рамках осенних встреч, и в рамках других мероприятий. Я благодарю наших спикеров сегодня. Очень надеюсь, что мы вас увидим в Петербурге в офлайне в следующий раз. И, может быть, даже с вами осуществим какие-нибудь интервенции в городскую среду, потому что она явно требует такого творческого отношения, которое демонстрирует все ваши проекты. И было очень здорово слышать о вашем опыте и о таком разном опыте, но тем не менее очень схожем опыте пересоздания, реконструирования города, создания новых пространств для людей с новыми смыслами, которые вкладывают в эти пространства сами люди. Большое спасибо, мы благодарим вас и всего доброго.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you all, and let's get together sometime.
Yeah, I will be in touch, certainly. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Да, пока-пока. Спасибо.